sunny South Florida. Martin, where? What agency? I started off in South Florida. I grew up in South Florida. I think Mike did too.
I did. I'll never go back.
Well, I did for 2 years. It didn't last.
All right, we're going to go and get started. Welcome, everybody. I know it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon here on the East Coast, so we appreciate you joining us if you're on your way home from work or you're winding down your day. Thank you very much. I think it's going to be really cool. Overall, just to let you know, we are recording it, and there is going to be a question and answer session at the end. So we will let anybody jump in at the end who wants to ask Jon some questions. So first of all, just a couple of slides. It's literally going to take maybe a minute. If you probably heard about this webinar through maybe an email I sent you or something like that. So thank you very much. If you got this through LinkedIn, that's cool too. But Advanced Police Concepts, we were founded in 2016, and we really believe that the great men and women of law enforcement deserve awesome training from the best instructors in topics that matter. And luckily enough for me, one of the instructors for Advanced Police Concepts is Jon.
Thank you.
We've been all over the country. I just counted after this month, we'll have been in 19 states, Jon, 19 states live. And
well, yeah, I said a couple of years ago when we were just in Florida, I said APC worldwide, we're going to do it. So we're almost there.
We're almost nationwide, right?
You're doing well.
But it's online classes. I think we're in every state now.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen Hawaii, but I know we've had Alaska. We've had almost every state. Listen, if you know about us and you know we got a bunch of courses available to you, including Jon's interview and interrogation, extracting the truth course, but a lot of other investigative courses. So if you're looking for something or you know somebody who's looking for something, please check out our website. That little dotty thing takes you right to our website. We're also proud sponsors of the Southeastern Field Training Officers Association. This will be our 3rd conference. We're the founding corporate sponsor for SFTOA, and we're going to be in Orlando, May 13th through 15th in Kissimmee, actually, which is right down the street from Disney World. So it should be another great conference. Jon, you spoke last year. What'd you think about it?
Oh, I had a fun time, especially was that your first year doing it, or was that your second year?
That was our second year, yeah.
Yeah, I thought the turnout was great. I really had a good time. I didn't know what to expect going in because it's a new conference. A bigger turnout than I thought, and they just get bigger each year. So it was a good time. I really enjoyed it, and then made some good contacts as well. And that's the good thing about those conferences is it's not just the people who are speaking, it's all the attendees and all the contacts you can make throughout the country.
No doubt, right? So
Yeah.
That's why attending it and learning from others, and not just learning from the people who are talking. It's like you said, learning from others.
Yeah. And it gave my wife and I a chance to kind of get away for a couple days.
Yeah, it was a nice resort too, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And we're actively looking 2024 host sites. Clearly 2023 is done and 2024 is filling up fast. Finally, let's get to hear what we're talking about. We're going to talk about Jon's new book, Extracting the Truth. I'll put this up at the end too, but Jon's book's available on Amazon. And if you type in Extracting the Truth, it pops up right away. So it's an easy title to search for, at least for sure, Jon.
Yeah.
So and I'll put this up at the end, Jon, for everybody too.
Okay.
And while you're talking, maybe we'll throw a link in there in the chat room to that Amazon spot also. Okay.
Okay. Yep.
All right. So again, I'm Mike Schentrup. I'm the founder of Advanced Police Concepts, and like I said, 2016. But Jon was the first person who came on, and we decided to tackle some stuff together. And so that was probably early 2017, right, Jon?
It was. I was working for you, and you had asked me. You were
with me, Jon. You worked with me.
Let's face it. You work for you. Yeah, we were working together, and of course, you had approached me and said that you were thinking about starting a company. It was cool because it started off very small. Just a couple of classes here and there, and then it just kind of blew up to. I don't know if I can work my full-time job anymore. So it's yeah, you've done very well with the company.
It's not, I mean, yeah, I know, right? Yeah, I've made a lot of contacts, but listen, part of it is, and I'm not blowing smoke up your butt, is you, Rebecca, Rob Finelli, Wayne South, you guys, when you go teach, there's no problem, right? People are calling me back saying we need more of that, right?
Yeah,
Because you guys are fantastic. All right, so I kind of had some questions. This is going to kind of be an open thing. There's nothing structured here, but I kind of thought about some questions that I might kind of pose to you to kind of get the conversation started. All right, but listen, and what I want you to do, Jon, is kind of introduce yourself, right? Not Jon Rappa, the detective, not Sergeant Jon Rappa. Who are you? Where'd you come from? Like, what high school did you go to? How'd you grow up? You know, stuff like that. Tell
sure.
tell people a little bit more about yourself.
Not a very interesting story. I grew up in
I
South
know.
Florida.
I have a boring story, Jon. You do not have a boring story.
So I grew up in South Florida. I know Martin said he's over there hanging out in sunny South Florida. I was born in Hollywood, Florida. And went to Addix Middle School. I don't know if anybody's from South Florida. I went to Addix Middle School. I wasn't a very good student, so my 3-year education in middle school turned out to be 4 years. I played more Dungeons and Dragons than I did a 10 class. I was just a horrible student. And then, of course, I went to Hollywood Hills High School in Hollywood, Florida, but then I moved to Pompano my 10th grade year, and I graduated from Ely High School. Attended Broward College. It was Broward Community College for a couple of semesters, and currently I met my wife. Well, we'll do the journey. I started working in loss prevention, which I was always interested in law enforcement, and so I joined loss prevention. That would be my foot in the door, and that really got my interest going. I was always interested all throughout high school. But when I hit loss prevention, I got to work, catching shoplifters for department stores. I got to work with a lot of local agencies, and I was like, man, I would really like to do this job. So I did a couple of ride-alongs, and I was hooked, man. I said, I really want to be a police officer. So, um, I had a bit of a reckless driving history back when I was in high school, so I had to let a few years go by before I got on road patrol, became a police officer. And hey, is that Andrew? Outstanding. Andrew just signed on. He's an attorney from PA. I did a webinar with him a couple of weeks ago. So anyway, where was I? We were talking about so did the loss prevention thing, and then but I wanted to be a police officer. I knew I had to let some time go because of my driving patterns, and so I got a job with the Department of Corrections first. I did that for about 4 years. I got promoted to sergeant, and then shortly after, I became a police officer. I met my wife. We've been together for 26 years. We have 4 kids. We've been together a long time, and what's cool is she hasn't aged at all, and unfortunately I've grown a fat face, I've lost all my hair, my cheekbones are gone, and I got all these wrinkles, so I lucked out. But I met her right shortly after I graduated from the corrections academy, so she's been with me for my entire law enforcement career. And so eventually they offered a crossover class. There was Miami-Dades. I worked at a prison in Miami. I worked at South Florida Reception Center. They closed one of our South units. I went over to Broward Correctional Institution, which was the women's prison. I did that for 2 years, so I did 4 years total. And at some point they offered a crossover class, and so I joined that crossover to law enforcement class and kind of did that. And the rest is history as far as law enforcement is concerned. As far as me, yeah, I just kind of grew up in South Florida. Just I don't really do a whole lot. I boat. I like to fish a little bit. I'm the world's worst fisherman. And I'm just very dedicated to my family, and yeah, that's me.
You are a true family man, no doubt, Jon. And your wife hasn't aged. You are
No,
100%
no, it's
correct about.
insane. It's crazy. I don't know what happened. I'm glad. Don't get me wrong, but poor girl. Look at this.
Hey, listen. So of course, I read the book, and I'm going to ask you some questions about the book. And one of the places in the book, you kind of talk about some adverse things that happened to you as a kid that kind of made you think, like, what can I do in the future to help others who,
Sure.
in my shoes?
Yeah. So, when I was young, first 10 years of my life. So I met my father when I was 14, my biological father. But prior to him, the man that I thought was my real father, because he had raised me since probably as far back as I can remember. I mean, I think him and my mom married when I was 2 years old, so he's all I knew. And they obviously didn't tell me initially until years later. Um, he provided a really good life for us. He was a businessman, and always had a lot of different businesses going on. Very, very independent entrepreneur. And So he got mixed up with the wrong. We had moved to Arizona, and at some point when we moved to Arizona, he did like to gamble. He was very good. I used to watch him with the card games and whatnot. He won a lot of money from these guys. They couldn't pay him. So he also had a reputation for being a tough guy, and I think he watched too many mafia movies, to be honest with you. But they couldn't pay him, and so they made an arrangement, pay $250 a week, and they didn't want to do it. So obviously, they didn't want to pay him back. So at some point, they ended up murdering him. And I was 10 years old. And so up until then, we had a very, very, very nice life. We had, we lived in the suburbs. We had a nice home with a pool and things of that nature. We had moved to Arizona, so we were temporarily there. And of course, that happened. And that kind of changed everything for us. And the reason why I write about it in my book is that really shaped what I wanted to do later on. A lot of things that happened thereafter did, but understand that we went from living a decent life to, my mom was a homemaker, right? It was the 70s and the 80s, so it was very accepted back then that you stay at home moms and things of that nature. It was a very traditional family, and he was young, didn't have life insurance, so immediately we went on Section 8 housing. We were on welfare, the whole nine yards. So we went from living in the suburbs to kind of losing everything, and my mom started over. Shortly after that, my mom's father died of cancer. So it was really it was a really rough couple of months for us. And so throughout that time, one of the things that I remember about homicide, which really, really piqued my interest later on in life, was my stepfather was missing for a month. Nobody knew where he was. We were in Florida. Him and my little sister were in Arizona. He left her with the babysitter. He went out with these guys, and that's when they killed him. So nobody knew where he was. He was missing. And I remember for about a month and a half, he was missing. And I remember I would, you're 10 years old, so you're telling stories to people about, oh, I know, they know where my dad is. And I would make stories up. I know exactly where he's at. He's going to come home soon. And I would draw pictures, descriptions of my father and whatnot. And so one night I was sitting, we were in Florida, South Florida, and I remember sitting on the couch. And it's weird, at 10 years old, I could figure this out. I'm sitting on the couch, and a couple of detectives came late at night, and my stepdad's sister was there, and she gets up and she goes out with them, and they drive away. And I don't know, and I remember this to this day. I don't know where I came up with this or why I thought this, but I remember looking at my other aunt. I said, they found him. And she goes, what do you mean? I go, they found him. She goes, well, why do you say that? I go, well, there's no reason for the two detectives to come this late at night and Mike Maluba, his sister, drive off with them. I said, they found him. And sure enough, the next day when I came home from school, they told me. So it was crazy. But years later, 30 years later, when I get into law enforcement, that really shaped my interest in going into homicide. These detectives did a jam up job. They did a great job. They solved the case. They solved the murder. They got justice for as much justice as you can get. Your family member is gone. It changes everything. But they got justice. Right. And I just, years later, I look back at it and I said, that's what I want to do. There were some other things, obviously, that shaped my whole interest in getting into law enforcement. Some other things that we had adversities that we had to go through, alcoholism and drug addiction and whatnot. But all of that kind of shaped me to where, as a kid, there was nothing I could do about it, and I think I put that in my book. I said, I can't. I had a new stepfather that was pretty violent when he got drunk. And as a kid, I couldn't beat him up. I was just a kid, I couldn't solve the murder of my stepfather because I was just a kid. So as I got older, I really enjoyed what I did as a police officer. It's what I wanted to do. And I always felt like I was doing something for somebody like me when I was a kid that was helpless, right? If that makes sense.
Right.
And so that brought me to law enforcement. And man, no matter how, it's crazy because I talk about it all the time. I love this job. I love it more than anything. As even during our rough years during 2020, 2021, when I was like, I want to quit. I still didn't know if I could because I really love the job, and I really like what we do for people, so that kind of brought me to where I was.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like your second book, Jon. Very, tragedy, but resilience, a lot of different messages in there of how you've come along and how it shaped you as a man and as an adult and stuff like that, right? So
yeah, if I could cut you off, since we're on that, one of the hardest cases I ever worked, if you'll remember, you were my lieutenant at the time, was Antonio Mason.
right.
If you remember Antonio Mason, he was the wrong target. A bunch of dope boys got their money ripped off, $80,000. The kingpin, the drug guy, says, "Go out and get my money back. I'll give you $10,000, whoever can get my money back." So they do their own street investigation. They hit the wrong house. They don't say anything to anybody. They open the door and spray like 20, what is it, 26 rounds, 32 rounds, something like that. It was just everybody
Yeah.
shooting from windows, from doors. A 2-year-old baby gets murdered. I mean, I'm sorry, gets shot. And her father's, the baby survives, rips her arm off with an AK, and really severs it bad. And then the father, protecting her child, innocent father, gets his heart blown out. Remember that. So
I remember.
that case was very difficult because, if you remember, I had Kimi running around bragging about he's the man, he's the one, he's got another body, and Kimi was stopped in the perimeter, and next to Kimi was a shirt. It was just too coincidental. Yep. Next to Kimi was a shirt with the gunshot residue on it. So Kimi was our guy, and I chased him forever, but I could never develop probable cause. And months and months and months. And then remember, when the DNA came back, it wasn't Kimi's. It was some dude I never even met before. I have no idea who this guy is. So
I know, John.
You were there. So for 7 months, I was racking my brain. Why can't I get PC on Kimi? I put him in the box. I'm pushing. He won't confess. He won't admit. I couldn't get him to do. I couldn't even get him to break. And so I remember I had, when I felt like giving up, I had a picture of the guy who murdered my stepfather, and I put him right on my computer, right over my computer desk at work. And every time I felt like giving up, I would look at that picture and go, they didn't give up for us. I'm not giving up for these people. And the Masons were good people, like wrong place, wrong time, wrong house, wrong target. And the Mason family, they were just so solid. They happen to live in a high crime area. But that's not a crime. And they were really, really good people. And so, like, I put my heart and soul in that case. And, that, again, that the experiences as a kid really drove home. And I think the thing that got me the most, if you remember, when we show up, you were on scene. There were 20-something people in the house, right? If you remember that. There was a 10-year-old kid. At one point, I'm talking to witnesses, and I see this little 10-year-old kid. Now, mind you, I lost my stepfather at 10. There's a 10-year-old kid kicking the fence, and he's just crying. I go, "Young man, are you okay? Can I talk to you?" And he goes, "They killed my stepdaddy." That killed me. Like, instantaneously, my heart just dropped, and I just could feel it, and it brought me right back to childhood. So I just, you couldn't give up. And those are the cases that you work really, really hard for,
Well, you're making me feel real bad now, John, because I remember taking his face one time and putting it on the what did I put on the cold case poster?
Yeah,
that was a little mean.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was motivation. Yeah. Yeah. I had no cold cases, Mike. Not one.
Yeah. No, we use that case study quite a bit in some of our homicide classes. So I know the case just because I've talked about it so many times. And you guys did an incredible job. You and Grunder did an incredible job in the end. I mean, you got everybody.
Team. Yeah, the whole team.
Yeah,
everybody.
You got everybody.
Forensics, everybody.
All right, so let's turn a little bit. So you become a cop. Yeah, you work a couple different agencies. Well, first start at DOC, then as a police officer, you work at a couple different agencies. End up at Gainesville Police.
Yep.
And what got you really interested in interview and interrogation? What part of that? I mean, what was the thing that got you interested there?
That's a really good question. And so when I worked loss prevention, at one point I got promoted to key store investigator. This is when I worked for a company called Mervyn's, and part of my new responsibility was employee theft. So they sent me to Wicklander class, which is very equivalent to Reed. Yes. So I went to Wicklander, and I came back, and now I get to interview dishonest employees. And it was a lot of fun. I mean, I was like, wow, this is like a chess match. Now, I wasn't any good at it. I was new. I was successful sometimes, other times I wasn't. And you need those operational reps. But I thought it was real. I just really, really enjoyed it. So then, of course, I wanted to make the big bucks. So I left the private sector and went to the Department of Corrections. That's always my joke, because they pay horribly. I wanted to get in law enforcement. And then you lose what you don't use. I wasn't doing it anymore, right? So years later, fast forward to 2012. Andres worked at Mervyn's back in the day. What year, Andres? What year? I think I was there in 96. Oh, Radio Shack. Yeah, okay. Yeah, Wicklander. It was a good class, I thought. So let me rewind. 2004, I'm assigned to the DEA task force. And 2003. Okay, I was that was a cop. They closed Florida, I think, back in '97. All the Florida marketplaces. So in 2004, I become I'm a police officer and I'm on the DEA task force. And there was this guy on the team, and I don't think he realizes to this day what a I guess he was such a motivator in what I wanted to do. Like I really looked up to this guy, and I don't think today he realized how influential he was on me. But I would watch him now. If you work narcotics, you work criminal investigations, two completely different interviews. But they all have one basic thing: it's connection with people to get them to cooperate with you. Two different interviews, right?
Right.
But he could get anybody to do anything. Like this guy was amazing. He would work two cell phones, maybe three cell phones back in the day before having those many cell phones were cool. And he had sources all over the county. This guy was just constantly, he was the guy who led our team to all the cases that we worked. He was really good. But to watch him in action, to watch his gift of gab, I remember being new, brand new, and I wasn't really good at interviewing back then. I wasn't at all. I remember he did a knock and talk on this organization that all they did was rent houses throughout South Florida, and the houses were empty. They were full of grows in every room. Knocks on the door and talks to the guy for a few minutes. And I shit you not, within 10 minutes, he got consent to search the house. It was completely legit. It was legal. There was no coercion. He just had this way of connecting with people. And I said, how does this guy do this? And so then I learned that I learned that he is his family, his parents own a whole line of dealerships, car dealerships in Michigan. And that's where he gets that gift of gab, right? So I mean,
Right.
I absolutely. And he was like a car salesman, just sitting down talking to these people. I was like, and I was flabbergasted. I was utterly impressed with how good he was. And everybody knew that this guy, Robbie Crispin, can pull it. Years later, he's not in law enforcement anymore. He retired. And I talked to a mutual friend of mine. He's now I found out that Robbie owns his own private investigation firm in South Florida. He's doing very well. I've seen him on Nancy Grace a couple of times. So he really has, yeah, he's really been
Okay.
successful. But
Nice.
working with him, I always said to myself, I said, I wish I could do what he could do. That's who I wanted to be. You know, when you emulate somebody in law enforcement, you always latch onto somebody and say, this is the style that I want to do. It
Right.
was honestly, it was that. And that got me into it. So as soon as I could start taking courses, I just started putting in for one after another.
Nice. Nice. So so you learned how to do it. You had your role model. You had this guy, that aspirational person who you kind of looked up to, right?
Yeah.
So you start going to classes, and I know, like, you worked at the Gainesville Police Department with me. You were on a TAC unit that investigated a lot of
Yeah.
violent crime, including robbery and some shootings and stuff like that. And I watched you do your interviews. I mean, you were very successful. Um, Talk about maybe your biggest screw up as a interrogator.
There's so many of them.
You all
So
have.
I'll bring one up in particular. And I actually, in my 2-day class, since I think last year, I switched the way I teach my 2-day class up. Now I open it up with the worst interrogation I ever did, and I actually show it. It's humiliating, especially if you know how to conduct an interview and interrogation. When you watch it, you're like, what is this guy doing? It was horrible. It was me and Grunder. It was the Ishmael Daniels case. And if you remember, we were up for over 24 hours. For some
Yep.
reason, I don't know what the rush was to arrest the guy right away. He didn't know we were on to him, but we had to go get him that night. 24 hours, no sleep. We went and got him. Boom. Let's hit our 25th hour and let's sit down exhausted and try to conduct an interrogation. And everything that I teach in my class, I did none of it. I did none of it. And I remember walking into the room right before we opened that door, and I looked at Grunner. I go, how do you want to play this? He goes, man, let's just go hit him hard. I go, let's hit him hard. We went in there and we hit him hard, and it was horrible. It was bad. It was just god awful. And so in my 2-day class, I open it up with that video. I show that video. I show about, I do a case study, and then I show about, I think, 12 to 14 minutes of that interrogation. And I highlight and caption all of my mistakes. And there were tons of them, a lot of mistakes. And you're always going to make mistakes. I still make mistakes. But I captioned and I highlighted all of them. And then the next 2 days over that class, we fixed those mistakes. But it was really bad. There were a lot of things that we did. Would you like me to talk about some of the things that we did that was bad?
Sure.
So one of the things, I really believe in connection, building a connection with somebody, rapport. I
Right.
always talk about the three fundamental C's of an interview and interrogation. The first one is connection. Then it's your presentation, right? It's your content, and then it's the closing. And that first C is so important. It's the connection, and it just because you don't build a connection with somebody doesn't mean you're not going to get them to cooperate with you. But studies show that when you have a relationship focused interview, your chances of getting cooperation increase exponentially. And so we sat down and there was no connection. I literally went right to the crime. I sat down. I know you want to know why you're here. Your name came up, bam, and I hit him. And that's not the way I interview people. And I did that with him. It was just it was just a bad way of doing things, and it just didn't work right off the bat. I was very unfriendly. I was exhausted. I was tired. I was frustrated, and you could see it. At one point, Grunder and him, and I show this in the class, they start arguing back and forth. Grunder walks out, slams the door. He's pissed off. He starts cussing at him. It was just a really bad interview. I didn't get a good timeline. I was giving up information that I shouldn't have given up. I always believe that if you get a timeline, their side of the story, you got to play stupid, play dumb. Don't tell them what you know. Don't tell them the evidence you uncovered, because if you do, they will tailor their story around what you told them. So I don't do that. I allow them to give me their timeline. I don't call them out on their bullshit. I just, I listen to them. I didn't do that. I kept calling him out. I kept telling him the video that we had. I kept telling him the evidence that we had, and I hadn't even locked him down to a story yet. So it was just really bad. And one of the worst things that I did, which changed my whole outlook of lying to people, the United States Supreme Court says we can. I don't do that anymore. And I actually teach in my class, and I know I talked about it in the book, be very cautious with lying. It's not a good idea. He caught me in a lie. I told him that I had his phone records, put him right there in the area. There's nothing you can do about it. Tell me why you were there. And his co-defendant, who did confess, said, yeah, we took the batteries out of our phone and left them at home before we killed him. So, and I could see the confidence in Ishmael Daniels, the suspect, when I lied to him. I could see his confidence grow. And every time I would bring up real evidence, he would go right back to the cell phone. Check those records again. Check those. He would deflect and go right. That was his safety zone. And I really messed that up, So I've learned over the years, it's really not a good idea to lie to people or fabricate evidence. You really don't have to. It's all about persuasion and influence,
Yeah, and you went straight to the bluff, right? I mean, as opposed to maybe a hypothetical, which I know you teach the difference between those two, right?
Yep.
All right, so you kind of touched on the idea of lying to people, right? Yeah. And why it's not a good idea. And just personally, my experience, and it was towards the end of my detective career, they start asking you on a stand now. What gives you the right to lie to this person, right? And then you have to try to explain to the jury why. I'm just trying to get to the truth. I'm using it as a tool to enhance the truth-telling capabilities of the suspect, right? It's hard. I'm not saying don't do it. I'm just saying you're going to have to explain yourself on the stand. And like I tell everybody else, the higher level case you're talking about, you're going to have really good attorneys, right? We're not talking about public defenders. They can't get their way out of a paper bag sometimes. But once you start talking about homicide or high-level offenses, you're going to have other attorneys in there who really know what they're doing, and they're working hard to poke holes in your story and show your incompetence and your laziness and stuff like that.
It's funny that you say that. And I'll say his name. I respect his work. He's a defense attorney. His name is Kanan Goldman. You remember Kanan? Public defender, phenomenal public defender, great. And he was the first one to call me out on the stand on my lies. And then during closing arguments, reminded the jury that I was a liar.
Right, exactly.
I was like, oh my God, this guy's really good. And I never experienced that before. And I think I touch up on that in my book. I know in my class I bring it up a lot. There are two reasons why I think it's just a bad idea to lie to people, and just be honest about the evidence you have.
Yeah, that's a good one too, right? Just now he didn't last long as a PD either, right? He left.
Oh, he's still there
as a PD.
Oh yeah, he's he's again. Him and I were very big adversaries for a while, and I walked into a deposition after he destroyed me on that one case, and tried to destroy my character. And when I walked into a deposition, he actually slid some candy my way, and he was like, "Here, man, I want to make a truce." And I walked in pissed, and I couldn't help but laugh at that. And then we talked a little bit, but yeah, he's still there. I saw him a few weeks ago.
Okay, that's awesome, man.
He's really good. But guys like that, who really want to, defend their clients, they're gonna do that. So I just think it's a bad idea.
Yeah, that's awesome, dude. All right, so the whole idea maybe about lying or bluffing and stuff like that's kind of changed over the years, and I know you didn't bluff much. I know we've that's just something probably due to the tiredness and trying to get the thing over with as much as anything else.
Right.
I was right there on another case, same thing, and I don't even know what I was doing at the end of the case, interviewing this guy at 3 a.m. in the morning after 27 hours or whatever. So I've been there with you on the tiredness. That's a factor. And you're right. There's no reason we had to get that guy that night other than we just wanted to go get him. We could have let that guy sit a day, got a warrant, you could have got some sleep, got your game plan together, right? So how about this? How was your how is your thought process on detecting deception, right? All these kinesic ideas and stuff like that. How has that changed over the years?
So as you remember, I started every class with 4 hour block of detecting deception. The more I studied, the more I looked into it. I changed the name of the class to detecting stress caused by deception, because you learn you're not detecting deception. Nobody can. It's the stress signs that you're seeing. Um, and then at some point, and don't get me wrong, I think it has its place. I completely took it out for now. If I had 3 days to teach a course, which one day I will, then I might put it in on that first day. Um, but the way I teach it now is extremely different. I spend the first hour telling people that studies show that we trained law enforcement officers still only get it right 50% of the time. Like everybody shows a different sign. And if I ask somebody a question, they're going to show a sign. Maybe they cross their arms, maybe they scratch their head. We're looking for clusters and things of that nature. It doesn't necessarily mean they're lying. It means they're either uncomfortable with that question, or they're stressed about that question, right? So why are they stressed? So the way I teach it now, if I teach it, is rather than go after, I'm not going to bash the company. I really like the company, but one of the courses that I've taken, they do a whole behavioral analysis thing. And then if they show all the signs of deception, then you go right in for the interrogation. And I think that's a huge mistake. I used to do that because that's the way I was trained. And I had a couple of people in the box that, over the years, that I realized were being completely honest, but showing these signs. And I'm like, why are they showing these signs? I thought this was signs of deception. You study more, you learn more. And so the way I use it now is I use it not as the end all be all. I'm not interrogating anybody just because they scratch their head, or they went or they cross their arms, right, or they won't look me in the eye. I use it as a tool. Meaning maybe I look into that person a little bit more, or I notice that when I asked this question, he showed some cluster signs of stress. Well, what about that question made him uncomfortable? Let me explore that a little bit more. But it doesn't mean I'm going to interrogate him. Matter of fact, to give you a quick case, you remember the Stephen Dobie case, the Fletcher shooting that happened many years ago. 27 warrants later, we finally get the right guy. But if you remember, Stephen Dobie was my first suspect. Bad identifications. Identifications are the worst, right? And so I had a witness said, yeah, I know who it is. It's that guy, Stephen Dobie. I saw him on the back street. He ran from the scene. Then he crushed 2 cell phones, and 2 cell phones were taken during the robbery and the shooting. So, I naturally had probable cause. We get a photo lineup. He circles them. I bring him in, in the station. I talk to him, and not one sign of deception. Like, it was all truth. And I'm like, I'm not charging this guy. I don't feel comfortable doing it. Let me hold off. Tom Mullins puts him on a polygraph test. He passed the polygraph test. I said, okay, let me hold it. He could be a great liar. Who knows? Let me hold off. So a couple days later, I forget his first name, but Mr. Kirksey, his name pops up. And so I start looking into him, and I go visit him at his house. And instantaneously, the signs of stress. Like, every question that I asked, he did the complete antithesis of what Stephen Dobie did, the complete opposite of everything Stephen Dobie did. He showed all of the signs of deception and stress. Doesn't mean I'm going to interrogate him. I locked him to his story, locked him to his timeline, but now I'm going to use that as a tool to look at him a little bit more. And I did. I started looking at him because of his behavior symptoms, and I let my investigation decide who I was going to arrest. So I have changed my method of the way I go after somebody as far as in the box interrogating them. I'm not going to interrogate them just because of their behavior symptoms. That means I'm just going to look at him a little bit more, and then I let the evidence take me where it takes me.
In my experience too, it seems like it was always easier to determine when somebody's telling you the truth as much as it is in telling and then trying to determine whether they're
Yeah,
lying to you or not.
sometimes. Yeah. And again, we're only right 50% of the time, according to
Yeah,
studies.
that's
So
true.
I just felt bad teaching something that wasn't 100%. There was no certainty. It was like, well, you can get it right half the time.
Well, it's just like and what it's just like whatever process you learn. Like, I know you were talking about the Reed interview and interrogation process, and the thing is that Reed teaches a very structured way. And what do we do as cops? We cut out all the structure and we decide we're just going to
Yeah,
use
of
these
course.
things.
Yeah.
Well, and then we're wondering why it didn't work right, or
Yeah, of
why we're
course.
getting the wrong signs, right? Why we're
Right.
doing this wrong. Reed was very structured, right?
Very
So
structured. Yeah.
that's the problem. You teach these little tricks and you expect them to go out and practice and learn and stuff. And sometimes they just want to shortcut the whole entire process and
Yeah.
and believe they are human lie detectors.
Yeah.
That's the most dangerous person out there. People who really think they can determine if somebody's lying or not.
Right.
All right. How did so you practiced for what, probably 15 years as an investigator before you started really teaching a lot in
Yeah.
that. How did teaching change the way you practiced or
Good question. It honestly, it made me better. If you remember the class back in 2016, 2017, it's a lot different than it is today.
That's for sure.
Um,
Yeah.
because I'm putting the course together. One of the things that I thought was good about my class, and even the book that I wrote, if you've read the book, I tell the true stories that were the strategies we use, and then I talk about the stories that we use it in. In my class, I do the same thing. I'll show videos, I'll show video footage of different interrogations, interviews, and then the strategies, right? Because I think people are visual. But the more I would put my classes together, the more I would study, and I'd realize, well, this doesn't work. Why am I doing this? Pull this out of the class. And if I learn a new technique somewhere, a new strategy somewhere, I'd go out and try it. And if it worked, I put that in my course. So I really became I was always a student, right? The operational reps when I was on the tactical impact unit helped me out tremendously. I always tell people you have to have reps. You can't just take a class and expect to be good. You got to take a class and then come and put it into use. And we had people in the box every single night on TIU, whether it was for a major crime or whether it was for just a dime rock. Somebody was coming back to the station and we were going to interview them. And the reps we got night after night for years really, really helped me out. So I think those operational reps really did help me out a lot.
Agree with that.
It really did. But then fast forward, putting the class together, really kind of shaped the way of making the interview stronger because I became a more of a student of the art, and I learned certain things weren't working, certain things were, and I wanted to make sure that everything I taught in the book and everything I taught in my class wasn't going to get anybody sued. It wasn't going to get any statements suppressed or anything like that. And I wanted them to work. I wanted to make sure, one of the things that I talked about is my interviewing style has completely changed because I studied the peace model. I studied cognitive interviewing. I studied trauma informed interviewing that you sent me to and made me go. And and I learned that stuff. I'm like, wow, this stuff is really good. And so I started implementing it in my, because the good thing is I'm instructing, but I'm also still a practicing detective at the time. And so I would go back to the station and we have a case and I would put somebody in the box and I would use these strategies that I was learning and studying about the peace model, right? And something that came out of the UK, and I tried it and I was like, this is a really good way to interview people. So I started implementing that in my book and of course in my classes.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Last question I got to ask you, right? What made you write a book?
So a couple of different things. Two different things. I'll answer that question in just a second, Andrew. A couple of different things. I The main thing was this. I remember I would I've been thinking about writing a book for a very long time. But I remember in my class when I put my class together, I always tell people I didn't make any of this up. Nothing in here is me. I don't make any of this up. It's stuff that I've learned over the years. So please, this is nothing that I made up. And then every technique that I learn, or strategy that I learn, I put the book up on a slide, on a PowerPoint slide. I learned this from this book. I love to give credit because I want people to go out and find that resource. And so there were a couple of books that I was constantly pitching. And then one day in class, I said, I had everybody laugh. And I said, I've made these people so much money, I really should get a commission. And then I thought about it. I said, screw that. Why don't I just I've been talking about writing a book forever. I've been working on it forever, but now I'm a procrastinator and I kept putting it off. And finally, after I realized that I'm making all of these other authors money because I'm constantly pushing their books and people are taking pictures and I see that they're buying the books. I'm like, I'm just going to write my own book. And I did.
Yeah, that's I will tell you this too, is that you have inspired me, sir. Between you and Steve Sweeting inspired me to write a book. And I'm not even sure
Oh,
I care if anybody reads it. I just think it's kind of always been on my list, like the back of my mind, right? And why not, right? I should
sure.
devote some time and watch less Netflix and
That's
maybe
true.
write a
That's
book.
true.
All
Well,
right.
and I'll tell you the other thing is I wanted to give people, when you take a class, right? And everybody knows this. Everybody in law enforcement, it doesn't matter who you are. You take any class, you retain 10% of it, you go home, you forget the rest. You really do. I've taken so many good courses and I can only remember a fraction of what they taught me, and that your memory fades over time. So I wanted this book to, and I wanted to offer it to my students, whatnot. Initially, I never wrote it to make the best times list at all. You know, that's not my intention. My intention was, I really wanted to give somebody, a student of mine, a supplement to my teachings, because everything I teach, for the most part, there's certain things I teach that aren't in the book, but for the most part, a lot of what I teach is in the book, and it's a great refresher. So you know, not only was I pitching other people's books, which I still do, I still give everybody credit. I thought it'd be a great idea to give somebody the opportunity to supplement my training so they don't forget what they learned 3 years ago. It's there and they go back to it, you know, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense.
Yeah.
All right, I think we got a question from Andrew.
Yeah. So Andrew asked, what do you find is the most important trait in interviews and interrogations? The most important trait is empathy, in my opinion. I can walk into a room, slam my fist on the table, start yelling at folks, and I don't think it works. Sometimes it does. You can scare anybody into a confession, but I think I think that relationship focused interview really helps out, and that's why I'm big on connection. I'm really big on building rapport. I'm really big on, as far as the interview, starting it with, I always talk about, and it's in my book, talking about anything other than the crime for as long as you can. Really get their resistance from here to here. And then, of course, it's the empathy. It's easier to admit something to somebody, or even if it's a victim or a witness, it's easier to cooperate and open up to somebody that you trust. Without that trust, it's hard to open up to that person. It's the same thing in the sales world. If you walk into a car dealership and you have a snake of a salesman, you're not going to trust that guy and you're going to walk away, or you're going to be very hesitant to make that purchase with him. But if you walk into the sales dealership, and the guy is nice, you know, he talks about anything other than the sale, you know, anything other than the crime, you guys are having a good conversation, there's trust, you are more apt to buy from him. I know that because that's the way I am. I have walked out. I was telling my wife the other day, we were going to buy a house over by Santa Fe High School, that new development, about a year and a half ago. I wish I did, because the prices just skyrocketed. I made good money. But the salesman pissed me off, and I'm so stupid and so stubborn that I walked away. I was like, I'm not doing business with this guy. It's the liking, right? It's an empathy. Right. And I think that's huge. There's no difference between what they do in the sales room and what we do in the interrogation room. So I think the most important, Anthony, the most important attribute, Andrew, is empathy. I really do.
I think I would duplicate that also, and just add that if, depending on what crime you're wanting these people to commit to admit to, right? These are serious crimes. They've done serious damage to other human beings.
Yeah.
If they think you're going to sit there and judge them, why would they tell you?
Of
right?
Course. Of course.
Right. They want to talk to somebody who understands maybe why they did what they did, or at least gives them the impression, let me put it that way.
Yeah.
That, I mean, obviously I can't understand why a grown man would have sex with an 8-year-old, right?
Right.
That we have no comprehension of, but you can't wear your emotions on your sleeve. You have to at least display empathy, even if it's fake at that point.
Yeah. No, it's true. And we do it all the time. I think the other thing, Andrew, for at least for the interrogation aspect of it, remember, the interview is the fact-finding mission. That's where we're getting information about a case. The interrogation is where we sit down and we're trying to get the guilty person to open up to us and tell us what they did. To do that, I really think you have to build trust, which is huge. But also, I think that's why strategies like minimization, I think it really works, because a lot of times people will tell you the truth when they tell you the truth on their own without you offering any minimization. And they always downplay what they did. You always get a half truth. Everybody downplays. It's very rare in my entire career have I ever gotten so, and I did once, where somebody gets in there and says, this is what I did from A to Z. A couple of times that's happened, but most of the time people water down all the time what they do. So I think for us, if we can water it down for them without hurting our case, because certain themes, certain minimization strategies will absolutely hurt your case. As long as you don't hurt your case, and you give them the opportunity to reduce their resistance, it becomes easier. So building that trust and then kind of minimizing their actions and rationalizing their behavior, I think those are the 2 or 3 most important attributes of any interview and interrogation. Makes it very easy for people to open up to you.
No, for sure. For sure. Any other questions? Just throw them in the chat room. Hey, if you'd like to talk too, just raise your hand. We'll allow you to talk. We're at the question and answer phase anyway. We're in the question and answer phase right now, so don't be afraid to talk. Remember, I threw the link in there for Jon's book. I'm sure he wouldn't mind if a couple people bought it, right, Jon?
Yeah. Yeah, I wouldn't mind at all. Yeah, if anybody's read it, anybody has any questions that they want to talk about, something that either they want to touch up on, or maybe they didn't understand something, or wanted more clarification, let me know that as well. Or if you haven't read the book and you want to know if X, Y, and Z is in there, throw your hand up, let me know, and we'll be happy to turn your mic on and we'll talk. We'll give that a few minutes.
Yeah, while we're waiting, so what are your some of your thoughts on we talked about empathy, we talked about kind of justification and stuff. You mentioned that there are a few times where you don't really want to give them too much of an out. I'm assuming you're talking maybe like
Sure.
self-defense and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah, that good question. And I know I bring it up in my book. I harp on it in my class. Self-defense themes are horribly dangerous. They will hurt you. There's two themes that I think you have to really veer away from. One of them is, the self-defense theme. And understand that if you offer that self-defense theme to somebody, you've given the defense their defense. You possibly given it, now you've given the state hurdles to work through. So I think self-defense themes are extremely dangerous unless, and this is one of the things I talk about, unless the evidence in any theme, any minimization, any out that you give them, you have to make sure that it's not going to hurt your case. And one of the things that I say is, like, let's say hypothetically, as a last resort, like nothing's working, you can't get this guy to come off it. As a last resort, if the case involved, let's say, somebody robbing somebody who was unarmed, it was a real legit robbery of a real victim. The victim ran away, and the bad guy shot the victim in the back 3 times as he was running away, and the guy was unarmed. There's no way in the world that he can claim self-defense, as long as the evidence doesn't match the story, as long as the evidence shows that it can't be self-defense. Then, as a last resort, I say, okay, maybe you can use that. I really hate the self-defense theme. It could hurt your case. The other thing is, never, ever, 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 ever use the theme on a sexual battery case where you're blaming the adult victim of an adult crime. She had it coming, she wanted it, maybe things like that. I think that's extremely dangerous. You are going to destroy your case. A matter of fact, I'd be surprised if the state even files on something like that. I think the only time that something like that would work, if there was a 40-year-old man and a 9-year-old girl, because there's not a jury in the world that's going to believe that she had it coming, or that she wanted it, and you'll be surprised. I've had grown men so, desperate for the out, come clean and say, yeah, okay, I did X, Y, and Z. When you throw a theme like that, it's crazy. They'll still tell you what they did. I think people come to a position of emotion and not logic sometimes, but we don't want to hurt our case. So in cases like sexual battery, self-defense, horrible, horrible ideas to throw those kind of things out.
Yeah, I want to add just a smidge too, because you said adult on adult sexual battery. I would say any girl over the age of 11. I'm talking about,
Yeah.
because then it's like, well, she looked like an adult and she was trying to act like an adult. You don't want to give them any opportunity to use that defense in court. And so yeah, I would say that too. All right, let's see. Oh, well, you got sold one book today, Jon, at least.
Thanks, Andrew.
All right, that's it. Any if nobody else has anything, throw it in there, please. We'd love to hear from you. If not, I'm gonna let Jon give a little closing statement, and I think we'll put up his little Amazon thing again. Actually, I'll put it up while you're talking, Jon.
Okay. Yep. Yeah, so I just wanted to say I really do appreciate Mike for putting this together. I appreciate everybody for signing on. I hope that you got a little bit of value from some of the lessons. If you're interested in buying the book, it's right there. If you're interested in attending a class, you can go to advancedpoliceconcepts.com. I'll be scheduling 2024 here in a couple of weeks. I'm just waiting on GPD to come out with my schedule for next year. I've got a bunch of different agencies on the list. I may be coming to an area where you guys are at now. We do have an online class for those of you who can't attend in person. And I love what I do. I love what I teach, and I hope that you get a little bit of value out of the book. I think that you will.
Well, you got a couple in the book. You're going to the Nashville area beginning of January.
Yeah, I am.
Right. And you'll be in Alachua County here in Gainesville in December at the police academy.
Yeah.
I think that
I know
one's
there's
full,
still
though.
some seats
Pretty...
available. Yeah, there's still some seats available with that
Are
one,
there?
I believe.
Okay.
I believe.
All right. Well, there was a waiting list too, so I don't know. Any other spots you're going to go that you already know? We just don't have the dates yet.
Thanks, Steve. Um, well, yeah. Here's where I'm probably gonna go. I know we're gonna go back to Arapahoe, so we'll go to Colorado. We got a couple agencies in Texas still, going back to Wisconsin. Jacksonville. I think we're gonna go to Wildwood, the Ocala area. I know we're gonna be down in sunny South Florida. I taught at Lighthouse Point a few months ago. I know I'll be at Pembroke Pines sometime next year. Back at Lighthouse Point PD. I'm trying to think. I think I'm going to go to Chicago, not Chicago, but what is the name of that agency outside of Chicago, Mike?
I
Where
don't
is
think
it?
we're going there, John. You're talking about
Oh,
Schaumburg. That
Schaumburg. We're
one's
not going to Schaumburg. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, there's a couple of other places I can't think of off the top of my head. Okay. Oh, California, but I think that's a closed class, but we are going to California.
Let's
Uh,
hopefully get those dates. Yep.
yeah, absolutely. Putnam County, Florida. So we'll be all over. And just keep an eye out on advancedpoliceconcept.com. They'll tell you. You can also go to my website, jprseminars.com. I also have a YouTube channel. I do have a TikTok. They're called the Law Maniac. I'll throw some training videos on there every once in a while, and then of course some funny videos, just to keep it lighthearted. Yeah, yeah. I
Well,
appreciate
you're
everybody
killing it, my
signing up.
brother.
Yeah, I
You're
got a
killing it.
couple of things here. Let me just see what they said. Philip, appreciate it. Steve, I do appreciate that. And I'm not missing anybody. I appreciate everybody for signing up. Thanks a lot. Oh, there's one
I
new
think we're going
message.
to stop recording, John. Great webinar. I think it'd be great. And
Thanks, Blake.
maybe we'll just pick a topic, and maybe sometime next year we'll just do a 1 hour on a specific topic just for everybody.
Yeah, and I thought about talking to you about that after the webinar, Mike. I got an idea of something that I'd love to just teach for free, about an hour, 2 hour, and we'll invite everybody back on, more of a training lesson rather than a book talk.
All right, sounds good. Talk to you later,
Outstanding.
brother.
Blake, thank you.